it's time to reclaim ourselves and reinvent ourselves. What I love the most about your podcast is the fact that it captures the journeys of all types of women-loving women experiences. And I love that. There were episodes on individuals and couples and RVs and, making awesome excursions all around the country. And that episode blew my mind.
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. I am humbled by the guests we've had who have really made this podcast what it is. Guests like Melanie J Rogers, the founding editor of SOREN Lit, a creative writer and photographer who focuses her lens, both photographic and written, on the South. We'll talk to her about her work and just the joys of doing digital content in a queer space, and how she, as a listener of the Zami Nobla podcast, was inspired to create her own podcast.
My name is Melodie J Rogers. I am 44 years old, and I show up in the world as a mama, a creator, a community builder, and as my ancestors' wildest dreams.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
My ancestors' wildest dreams. Perfect. Well, we are so glad to have you on the Zami Nobla podcast today as we celebrate our 3rd anniversary.
Thank you.
And this is something very special because I have to tell our listening audience how we met. Marianne, the course executive director of Zami Nobla, my partner, told me, there's this woman and she said she's listened to the podcast, all the episodes, and she loves it and it inspired her to do her own podcast. I'm like, I've got to meet this woman. And we had a chance to talk, and I'm like, see, this is what it's about. Creativity and putting yourself out there is not just for you. It really is about the connections we make. So we're going to talk a little bit about the power of podcasting. We're going to talk about the creative work you're doing and just celebrate being here together and talking about the power of coalitions as well and coalition building. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've always been a creative. My first love was always writing. I am from Atlanta and raised in Atlanta, born in Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, but raised in Atlanta, and had the privilege of, our first house being right in the center of things. We were right on Peachtree Street, Midtown Atlanta. And so we lived in this small little subdivision, one of the first Black families that moved into this Peachtree Hills little area. And so that's its own story. But I was always a creator. I was always writing stories in and around Peachtree Hills Creek. And my mom and dad are also just phenomenal creatives in their own right. My dad is a technology genius, and he's an editor for television, major networks. And he's also the DJ that never died, I like to say. He runs his own Radio 48, radio48.com, which is his own platform for promoting jazz musicians all around the world. And my mother is an artist. She's a retired teacher from Atlanta Public School System recently, and an artist interested in watercolors and also a writer. So I grew up with that, that emphasis in technology and that promotion of art and the promotion of my writing. As a girl, I was always with a journal. Still to this day at 44, I'm always writing. And yeah, that's pretty much me. I really, I went to school in the South, bachelor's degree from Georgia State Universities in English literature, and got my master's degree in creative writing from Queen's University of Charlotte, which was a delicious experience because it validated my love of poetry and fiction and just really uplifted me and set me off on the journey to bigger, create platforms of my own and for communities of my own.
Well, it seems as if you got your creative genius honest via your parents and just the work of writing from a very young age up until now. Let's talk about the power of that creative energy and creative work for queer communities and why it's so important.
Yes. Goodness, it's so important. I've been a part of so many different movements, since I started publishing my work. I used to, back in the day, I think it was early 2000s, so over 20 years ago. Yeah. I worked with Labris Atlanta, which was a publication just for women, just for queer women, queer identified women in the city of Atlanta. And my job was to take pictures and write feature articles and stuff like that. It was perfect because, that was a time where I could stay up past 8:30 and go to the clubs and all the other social landscapes and just kind of document what was going on.
What was that social landscape like then?
Oh, the social landscape. We're talking about the Atlanta, in the late 90s, so 99 and early 2000s. So that social landscape looked like there were a lot of different clubs that were offered. One of the most popular clubs that I used to write articles about was My Sister's Room. My Sister's Room. No, I'm sorry, not My Sister's Room. The Other Side. That's what it was called. The Other Side. And that was a huge social landscape for exclusively lesbians and queer identified women. But on Wednesday nights, they had, it was like house and hip hop night. And that's where they opened their doors to everyone. And that particular night the majority of it was men of color coming in with, the Vogue and the drag culture and we represented, lesbians represented, we showed up for that as well in solidarity, in support, to dance and everything. So that was one of the major clubs that, I reported on, but also, clubs like, nightlife that had come and gone, like, Loretta's and, going back to Black and Latin drag culture. We had our own in Atlanta and it was so beautiful around that time. And Loretta's was a huge club, a huge social landscape kind of icon around that time. It wasn't a huge club at all. It was very small, actually, but it was always packed to the max. And it was about just opening doors and dance and creative and celebrating the music that individuals were creating around that time. I also love, when we talk about social landscapes, it's not just about the club, even though it was about the club for many of us, especially. I'm definitely that queer girl that, I participated. I love to dance. I love to be amongst my people, queer community. But also bookstores. I was a literary nerd and a writer and stuff like that. My social landscape was G.R.I.T.S books, G.R.I.T.S Books and More. That was in Little Five Points around that time. Now it's on Agnes Scott campus. But it was in Little Five Points around that time. And, that was the first place I came when I came out. I came out at like 18, 19, something like that. And I needed a resource quick. I needed guides on, understanding my queer identity. And so G.R.I.T.S Books was awesome, a bookstore that offered those resources, but also offered parties as well for women. A lot of people don't know that. At one point, I think it was like every first Wednesdays or something like that, they would have these amazing socials just for queer women. And so, yeah.
That is fascinating. We could just spend the next hour fleshing that out because the history and the herstory of queer, Black, and brown Atlanta is just not something that we have had the chance to talk about, or a lot of people don't know it. I came to Atlanta to go to college and then move away, and I came back in 2007. And so a lot of that space that you talked about, I was not aware of. But I do remember my sister's room.
Mm-hmm. My
And
sister's been still going on.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And that was one space that I visited with a friend. But all these other incredible spaces you're talking about, I don't know. So being able to just capture that and to put some light on that is very, very important. How long did the magazine you wrote for Labras? How long did
Yeah.
that? How long did
Lavish
that last?
That, let's see, it didn't last long, unfortunately. I know it might have been something like 2 or 3 years at the most. My contribution was probably about close to 2 years, and it was like off and on. They had challenges with advertising and making sure that, have to reach out and get ads to, for distribution costs and stuff like that. And I know the editor at that time, her name was Maria Rivers. She was amazing. She, wanted to, give back and do more. And, but it was hard because it was all on our own shoulders, and so, yeah, the lifespan of Labras was very, very brief. But during that time, it was, still impactful, because you could find a Labras Atlanta magazine and every kind of queer outing. So at that, in the club, you could find a Labras, very much like Creative Loafing is in the South. You can find it at the bookstores, but definitely in all the queer spaces that were present at that time, Labras, wanted to connect and provide that publication to queer community. Mm-hmm.
All of that work, I'm sure, has really shaped you in terms of the work you're doing now as founding editor of SOREN Lit. Tell us a little bit about that, the podcast, your online presence, and just the work you're cultivating with this incredible venue of SOREN Lit.
Sure, absolutely. The pandemic, this present pandemic has transformed us all in a lot of different ways. And when Atlanta received that first lockdown, it was, that particular, I think it was sometime in March of 2020 where we received that first lockdown and, the whole city shut down. Everybody was in their homes. I was planning and figuring out what I needed creatively because I felt myself getting farther and farther away from community. And so I was thinking, you know what, let me connect with, let me start in my own backyard and just focus on writers in the South. And I just started writing different things of, ways to get people together. And then I got more specific and I said, well, what do I need? What do you want in this moment? Just being really deliberate with myself, like demanding of, that radical self-care. Sometimes you got to really look in the mirror. And for me, I had to say, that I wanted to be amongst writers. I was doing a lot of writing myself, and I wanted to share my work and I wanted to read other people's work. But again, I wanted to keep it in the South. And because I wanted to have conversations about other people's interpretations and love affairs and love-hate relationships with the South. because a lot of the politics and stuff that were going around that time, as it relates to the South and the pandemic, I felt like I needed an outlet to share myself, and so, yeah, and also being a Harlem Renaissance scholar, I'm a huge Zora Neale Hurston fan, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin. I love that whole Harlem Renaissance period. But as a Harlem Renaissance scholar, you're also, you privy to look at the Southern Renaissance that was also happening in tandem that period of time, 30s, 40s. Mm-hmm. And during that time in the Southern Renaissance, there was a neglect to promote Black and brown writers as much, and those who identified as queer or women loving women, non-binary individuals. We had been left out of that period of the Southern Renaissance in so many different ways. And so anyway, with all this brainstorming and being selfish on the needs that I needed at that present moment, I was like, well, let's reclaim the Southern Renaissance. Let's do this. Okay. And then let's start with, let's center the focus with women, femme identifying and non-binary writers, and see what we get. So SOREN Lit is SOREN LIT, and SOREN Lit is short for the Southern Renaissance Literature. And so, and again, SOREN Lit, our publication, is about reclaiming what was lost in the period in the 30s and 40s, and just focusing on women, femme identifying and or non-binary writers, with connections to the South. That's our hook. Everyone who's writing, everyone who gets a chance to get published with us has some type of history with the South. They're not necessarily writing Southern literature. They're just wanting to contribute to the conversation about their relationship with the South, and expose what they're writing in the moment. If that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. It reminds me of the work that E. Patrick Johnson did a few years ago, Black Queer Southern Woman. And in that volume of her story is just the power of talking about what it means to be queer, Black, and from this particular space. A lot of people would say, well, what's so special about the South? Why is it important to capture specifically this Southern lens as opposed to folks from the Pacific Northwest or California or up in Vermont? Why is the South so important? What significance does it make?
Sure. Oh, that's a great question. For me, it was a selfish reason. I've traveled all over the world, and what I bring with me when I travel is my Southern dialect. It comes in and out, but it's there. And for those who catch it, that Southern dialect, it's always different. It's always a different interpretation. Sometimes it's positive, and sometimes it's very, very negative, and seen and deemed as ignorant. For me, the Southern dialect has always been home. It's always been home. Didn't have any type of negative connotation on it at all. And for that, I am grateful. But I understand that it's not like that for everybody. And that's just my story. What I wanted to do with SOREN Lit was have that dialogue, that extended dialogue on other people's connections to the South. And on our website, I like to, in the intro, I say, welcome to SOREN Lit. And I talk about, this publication is for women, femme identifying and or non-binary writers. And then I say, exploring the lingering South, because the South lingers, the conversations of the South linger. The traumatic effects that the South has had on our history has lingered and transformed us all in many ways, honestly, whether you're from the South or not, so from the South or not. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to, inspired by Zami podcast and you, Angela, everything that you do is so eloquent and so beautiful and so intentional. And I wanted to do the same thing and really, really capture these different conversations, these different individuals. And so far, the website is www.sorenlit.com. And so far, the individuals that have been published on the site and on our podcast have been from all over. So we're not just talking about, Black folks, from the South. We're talking about individuals who are not living in the South, but they were raised by their Southern grandmothers. We're talking, we have, individuals who were born in India and now living in the South, and talking about racism, having brown skin and the first time experiencing racism, and writing poetry that centers on the impact of that trauma, that kind of thing. We have folks that grew up as farmers, in rural areas that see writing as a solitary act and are publishing for the first time and giving us those stories from what it's like to be, a farmer growing up in the rural areas and everything like that. And how and what the impact of the South has done on their lives. So it's all different stories with one connection. Yeah.
It's interesting to me because I'm not from the South. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Kansas. And I remember coming to Georgia, Atlanta, when I started college at Clark Atlanta University. And it was the air was different. The South was different from the Midwest and everything that I had experienced. But at the same time, there was something very familiar and very warm that I had, I think, missed growing up in Kansas. So I kind of fell in love with being in this space. And as I traveled to different parts of the country, to Oregon, California, Minnesota, it was very obvious that I was in different spaces. And I think sometimes we forget just the power of being able to locate ourselves and recognize what is special within that place. I think the same thing can be said of identifying queer creative work and the power of locating ourselves there, and just how special and how meaningful it is to share that with other people. So I'm excited about SOREN Lit and the ways in which this will help share some of that specific lens on locating oneself in the South and looking into that landscape. That's very, very exciting. Well, you're doing a podcast as well. How did that come to be?
I always like to dive in deep with any writer that I read. I want to know the backstory. I want to know where they're from. I want to know what their influences are. So I wanted a way that would be intimate for our readers that were, coming to our site, looking at our online publication. And so I thought, let's run a podcast in tandem with each issue. So we just finished the summer issue, and we're taking submissions right now for the fall issue. But for summer issue, we identified 14 amazing writers, and we, published their information on their site, their writing on their site, or their book information. A few individuals have books coming out and everything. And so we did publish their information for their book. And we interviewed each writer who was published, so that we could not only see their writing experience and everything like that. See their literary work, on our website, but also get to know these individuals and see where they are and how they were inspired. And I love it so much because all of our writers are so diverse. We have individuals that have long time publishing careers that have been doing thrilling work for a long time and love SOREN Lit, love our cause, want to be a part of our movement. And then we have individuals that, again, never been published at all, have been writing in their own spaces, and we have the opportunity. I have the opportunity to interview them and have these conversations about their writing journey, why they even started writing in the first place, and let them tell us about their connections to the South as well. And even see if there's any connections with their connections from the South and what they're writing, because sometimes there are, and explicitly, and then sometimes there are, connections that are more indirect, and I think that's all helpful. Mm-hmm. I think that's all very, very important, and the response has been amazing. People, I didn't realize, you find out if you do a project like that it's not just you that needed this particular information. Yeah, I needed to not only read their work, but I needed to know these people. I needed to know, what they were inspired by, and how the South has shaped them, along the way.
Yes, because I really believe that when we go deep down inside of our creative selves into that deeply erotic space, as Audre Lorde would say, we find that we can come up in the memory and the space of other people and really make some incredible connections. Which leads me to my second comment about the diverse community you have gathered with your contributors and how important it is to really, particularly during this space and time, find kinship with folks outside of your particular silos. I see a real need as we are traveling forward to expand the ways in which we have navigated spaces so that we can be in conversation with a whole host of people. And it leads me to my next question, and we talked a little bit about this before we started, was just the way in which you identify and your rationale for including various identities for SOREN Lit's contributors.
Oh, what a beautiful question. For me personally, full disclosure, like I've had so many, before I knew what queer was, I had a litany of labels, that was just my journey in my space. And so I remember being 19 and cutting my hair and identifying as butch lesbian, and I only doing that, using that identity because my hair was cut and I wanted to get the girls and the butches were getting the girls. And so that's what I was that was my logic and mindset, and on the way to the club, and it worked. It totally worked for me. I had a great 20s. But I knew that label and involving. I knew it was different. During that time too, as a young queer person, I did a lot of writing, and one of my first publications it was my first queer publication was with Stud Magazine. Stud Magazine was a publication in Phoenix, Arizona, and they were looking for writers, and I published this piece. What was it called? Oh my God. It was something like Stud and Femme. That's what it was called, Stud and Femme. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like a nonfiction piece, a very, very short nonfiction piece. And it was basically to the effect of, I wear I love my boy clothes. My community, encourages me or something like that. I get so much, support from my gay aunties and everything. But I also love my MAC Film Noir lipstick. I can't let it go. And so it was about, me embracing, loving stud culture, but also, loving, loving fashion and loving femme fashion and everything. And for me, during that period, I had issues with my body, I wasn't, I never really wore a lot of dresses all the time, up until that point. And so, I was comfortable in wearing boy clothes and everything like that. But then I started hanging out with some amazing women who were queer identified, who wore lipstick and wore dresses, and were just, fluid with their identity. And I thought, yeah, I could do that too. I don't have to be, for me, me, women loving women was an amazing gift. It was something that, I was born with, but it doesn't mean that I couldn't switch, change, and rotate and re-identify and relabel, as it suits me. And I love that. I love that I grasped that identity for me early on, because it helped me with, just connecting with a lot of different communities. When I came out as bisexual, early on as well, after, kind of playing around with femme identity, queer lesbian identified. And it was, revolutionary, for me. It was to be in charge of my own, in charge of the way I identify, and not society, Also, we're talking about the South, there was a lot of pressure back then on labeling yourself, and getting acceptance in the queer community. You're either stud or you're femme, especially in like communities of color. And so the ones that I was exposed to. So I felt like even more forced, a little bit, to choose a side, and the side was always chosen based on who I was hanging with at the time, and which was interesting,
And as we talk about the contributors being women, femme-identified, gender nonconforming, do you know anyone else who's doing this type of work, who's really focusing on that, and it's really looking into the South?
Sure. No. No. I have, other than like you mentioned E. Patrick Johnson, and there are other individuals that are doing it. E. Patrick Johnson, I thought that was a really good example, because within that book, he's capturing lesbians from everywhere, and but there's an emphasis there, on a lot of those individuals were from Atlanta, in the South and everything like that. And there are some individuals, let's just say many, there are many individuals that are doing the work. This particular project for me is exclusively selfish. And so my focusing on this particular, on the, women, femme identifying, non-binary focus, really came from the queer and non-queer communities that raised me. I exclusively, artistically, I would, I lived, in my 20s, I was living in Candler Park area. And, I didn't have a lot of money. And so I always lived in houses. I love old houses. And so I always rented houses, and with other roommates, several roommates, almost boarding house style, and it was always like 6 artists in a house, everybody did different things. And I was so lucky, being recently, coming out and queer identified, that these houses and these dwellings that I would put myself around were exclusively queer, exclusively LGBTQAI plus everything, you know. And one particular house I lived at for a long time in Candler Park area in Atlanta, we would have these fireside chats on Saturday, first Saturdays in our backyard. We had this amazing backyard. We lived in this like old school, Victorian house that was, on its last leg, but we were loving it. And so we had these fireside chats in back, these on first Saturdays. And we would just, it would be, poets, talking, reciting their poetry. It would be individuals who, lyricists from like hip hop field, hip hop genre, hip hop circles, spitting rhymes over the fire. It would be individuals just reading their articles or reading their stories, or talking about community projects that were up front, that focused on us, and queer identified folk. I love that whole period. There's, certain smells to this day take me back to that period. Jameson, Jameson whiskey, menthol cigarettes, flow cigarettes, that kind of stuff. And just, the crackling of the fire and everything. So anyway, all those elements for me, again, helped raise me and gave me the courage to be bolder with my own writing, be braver, and to talk about specific things that impacted me, as a Black woman or queer woman, or me wrestling with identity, that whole stud versus femme dynamic, I was also published in the G.R.I.T.S, Girls Raised in the South Anthology, along with these amazing writers from the South, Fiona Zed, and many others. And and I wrote in that piece the first short story I ever wrote. It was called All Kinds of Butch, and the character was a character named Izzy, who had just left home, rejected from her family, and was dealing with the whole stud femme dynamic, and trying to kind of identify based on the communities that she was surrounding herself with. I know that was a lot.
Well, and as you talk about just the gift of being in those communities, and the fire and the whiskey and the clove cigarettes, and just those very real kind of visceral responses to place and time, it makes me think of now how with the COVID pandemic, we just don't have the luxury, we don't have the gift. We don't have the gift of being able to share community and space like we once did. How has the COVID pandemic affected your way of being in the world over the past year?
It has affected me tremendously. I totally miss, I miss community. I miss being able to go to book events and festivals, and being amongst, part of a queer book club that cares, it's affected me in so many different ways, but it has also pushed me to rise above adversity, rise above my current circumstance, and to make it better in a way that I can identify. It forced me to say, okay, there's a pandemic going on in this world. How do I reclaim my sanity? How can I cultivate my art during a pandemic? What does that look like? And it pushed me to, create SOREN Lit. It pushed me to create my own literary publication, which I wanted to do all my life, and then boom, it gave me the courage to just make it happen. I mean, it really literally was like, okay, well, let me just create the website first. And that was the first thing I did. I was just like, can I do that? I'm like, I'm just going to do it, And I just created the website, and then from the website, I was like, yeah, I'm publishing it. We're making it live, So the website for me was my vision board. It was my vision board. And, putting the pictures together and looking at pictures from old school pictures from when I was writing and publishing too at Labris Atlanta back in the day, some of the photos I used on the website. And with those, that intentional focus of the website project for SOREN Lit, it was like, okay, well, we're going to make this happen. Let's go ahead and start recruiting writers to see if anybody else feels that need to connect in this way.
Share with us the website URL again.
Sure. It is www.sorenlit.com. That's SORENLIT.com.
Wonderful. And
the podcast, I did want to say on the podcast, can be found, SOREN Lit can be found on Apple and Spotify and anywhere a podcast lives.
Mm-hmm.
There we are. Mm-hmm.
I enjoy listening to it on the Apple podcast, so I'm glad you all are there. And speaking of Apple Podcast and podcasting as general, I'm waving my celebratory pom-pom for our third year anniversary with the Zami Nobla podcast. And we've been doing this and have over probably 45 episodes now. And so it's really exciting to have you on during the month of August, our anniversary month, and just to talk about the podcast from a listener's point of view and what you've most appreciated about the work we're doing.
Oh my goodness. I've listened to every episode of the Zami Nobla podcast. And I love that too, because your podcast is the only one that I can say I've listened to every single episode. And what I love the most about your podcast is the fact that it captures the journeys of all types of women-loving women experiences. And I love that. There were episodes on individuals and couples and RVs and, making awesome excursions all around the country. And that episode blew my mind. Those women, like, how amazing, what an idea, having the audacity to just say, you know what, let's do this together and let's just go all around the world. That's probably my favorite episode. But I love all of them. I love all of the stories, and I love how different each and every woman is on that particular on your podcast. And I also love the fact that listening to Zami Nobla podcasts gave me the courage really to kind of start my own, because I am a chatty Cathy. And I knew that any podcast that I would create would, I would show up as me, not as any persona or anything like that, mm-hmm. but I would show up as me. And I knew that by listening to Angela Denise Davis, you on there, that I would learn things.
I am so deeply humbled by my guests who come and who share their lives and the information they put into the pod sphere, and it changes that space, because there aren't a lot of podcasts where we see either Black women, either queer women, a woman with a disability, as I am legally blind. I'm humble when my guests come, like you, and share these incredible stories, and it makes a difference. And what's even more exciting is to hear you say that this podcast inspired you to start your own, because that is really the gift. particularly in this time of COVID, where people are pulling up their creative energies and saying, I want to do something. I want to be creative. I want to leave a legacy of the work that's being done. And at this point in time, I think podcasting is one of the best ways to get into that space and to, as I say, leave a receipt of your existence. It really is a wonderful thing. And all you need is a computer and a microphone, and you can talk to yourself, you know. So that's exciting. And I'm just so excited what you're doing with SOREN Lit, and just the ways in which this publication and the podcast is really creating more space for people to find voice and to put their creative energy into the atmosphere. It's a real gift. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be on board with SOREN Lit, and I love it so much. Labor of love, passion project, all the things. And the people that I've met, the writers that we've published, the volunteers that have come to my aid, all the things, and you, of course, and Marianne as well. You guys have been, just amazing models for, again, creating safe space and community building. And I'm just so happy to be connected to community in this way with SOREN Lit. Thank you.
Well, thank you for just being our guest today as we celebrate our 3rd year anniversary, the power of podcasting, what it means to be a creative person in the world and putting that out there, and just letting us showcase the work that you're doing. The final question I always have for my guest is, did we miss something? Is there a question I should have asked? Is there something you want to tell our listening audience? Because I think particularly now in this space with COVID and with the other constrictions that people may have on their lives, we need to hear something about, what it means to put your creative energy out there. And like you did, just do the work you want to see in the world.
I did want to say, support your local artists and writers. I think that, local artists and writers are the revolutionaries of our world, and they're documenting this amazing period, this unique period of history in this moment. And I feel that, radical self-care takes many shapes and forms, and you can do it in many ways. But also, why not do it by, supporting those who are active creators? And that's what I want to say. And, definitely learn more about the creators that we're showcasing at SOREN Lit on our website and on our podcast. And stay tuned, because we have all kinds of things popping up. Our fall submissions are open, so we're now accepting submissions for those who write poetry, nonfiction, and fiction, and or hybrid work. We're looking for things. And so go ahead and just review our website, sorenlit.com, and look at the submission guidelines, and look at the criteria of what we're looking for, and submit something our way, And if it's been something that's been collecting a little dust that you want to blow off and submit, why not? Because it's a new day. We are in a pandemic, and some people say we're in, apocalypse or something like that. Some people use that. Somebody said that this week, and I just laughed and nodded. But, we're in these unique times. And so it's time to reclaim ourselves and reinvent ourselves and cultivate the artists within. So hope to see your writing, and hope to read your comments about what we're doing at SOREN Lit.
Melanie J Rogers, thank you for being part of our Black Lesbian Herstory.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Melodie, for such a great conversation. And for our listening audience, let me know what you think about our conversation today by leaving a comment, give us some feedback, give us a rating wherever you listen to the Zami Nobla podcast. As always, thanks for stopping by. Until next time, have a sweet one.